Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator in-depth weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for July 6th of 2024. Today is going to be a little bit different. We are going to be starting off with the tropical weather outlooks, because if you haven't heard already, Hurricane Beryl, which is currently Tropical Storm Beryl, is currently moving through the Gulf of Mexico and is forecasted to impact the Texas coast here on Monday as a Category 1 hurricane at least. There is a hurricane warning out, and we will be covering Hurricane Beryl for the first portion of this forecast, and then the second portion of this forecast will be going over the severe thunderstorms that are currently ongoing across the Central Plains. However, this will definitely have a much larger focus on Hurricane Beryl in today's forecast. So, again, this is expected to strengthen into at least a Category 1 hurricane, potentially a Category 2 hurricane, when Hurricane Beryl moves closer to the Texas coastline. This is expected to bring a multitude of impacts with it as well, including high winds as well as extreme rainfall, with rainfall totals forecasted to get at least upwards of 8 inches just to the north of the Corpus Christi region, and including Corpus Christi, upwards of 4 to 6 inches of rainfall is expected across the Texas coastline and eastern Texas as well, moving into Arkansas. So we are expected to see an insane amount of rainfall that's going to come with this. That's not the only impact as well, but it is going to be by far one of the primary impacts that you will need to be watching out for, because even if you're not on the immediate coastline, flooding is definitely a very, very real threat to people that could potentially be impacted by Hurricane Beryl. So again, very large amounts of rainfall will definitely lead to quite significant amounts of flooding and significant accumulation in low-lying areas, and that could be hazardous to people that live in areas that get a large amount of accumulation when heavy rainfall is present in the region. And this is what the WPBC currently has issued as far as the flash flood outlook. There is a day 3 risk for flash flooding, a moderate risk for day 3 outlook for flash flooding for July 8th. And that does include just to the north of the Corpus Christi region, including Houston, across eastern and southeastern Texas. Again, this is day 3, so it isn't today. However, this just goes to show that we are expected to see a quite significant risk for flooding for today. Moderate risks typically do mean that we are most likely going to see widespread flooding, with possible accumulation being significant in low-lying areas. This is also 3 days out, and I doubt that this will be upgraded to a high risk for flash flooding. However, again, definitely make sure you're still watching out for flooding if you do live in this red area. Even in the yellow area, you could still see some significant flooding in some low-lying areas, and that's again not the only impact we're going to see from Hurricane Beryl. We are also expected to see a storm surge, even with a weak hurricane. Weak hurricanes still bring a storm surge with them. Sorry, I can't really speak, but along a very good portion of the Texas coastline, basically all the way from the mouth of the Rio Grande River all the way up to Sabine Pass, we are expected to see the possibility of storm surge that could reach up to 6 feet. With some areas seeing a higher storm surge than others, with some areas potentially seeing upwards of 4 to 6 feet. That's going to be to the south of Sargent and to the north of Mesquite Bay, with some areas that could only see upwards of 2 to 4 feet of storm surge. That's going to be to the north of the mouth of the Rio Grande River, and to the north of the San Luis Pass, and to the south of Sabine Pass. Again, even if you don't see flooding in this region, if you live along the coast, you could still see the very real risk of storm surge, as that will bring a lot of water out of the Gulf of Mexico and put it on the coastline and even further inland into some of these more built-up regions that, again, could definitely be very, very flooded, not only from rainfall, but also from rain and water being pushed directly out of the Gulf of Mexico from storm surge. Again, this is a very real risk. If you do live in the warning cone or in the forecast cone for Hurricane Beryl, please make sure you are watching for any updates on Hurricane Beryl and that you are staying weather alert, and again watching for any updates on how this system may change or what could be expected for your area. Please definitely make sure you are watching out for those things. Feel free to pause this so you can read this, but these are the key messages for Tropical Storm Beryl. A lot of information is in these 4 paragraphs, so I suggest pausing to read it if you are concerned about Hurricane Beryl, if you do live in the forecast cone. Moving on to our satellite view of what is currently going on with Hurricane Beryl as of right now. Do keep in mind, I am not entirely confident with tropical weather forecasting. I am significantly more confident with forecasting things such as tornadoes and hail than I am with tropical weather, because tropical weather happens like only a couple times per year, and I don't really get to have that much experience with it. Plus, it's not really that much of a passion to me, but it is a huge part of meteorology that I do enjoy covering from time to time. So please bear with me if some of the information is wrong, because again, I am still learning as far as meteorology, especially with tropical weather. So this is what's currently going on with Hurricane Beryl, or Tropical Storm Beryl, as of right now, because this is still currently a tropical storm forecasted to be a hurricane. So as of right now, there's not really much going on. It is trying to redevelop. There is a strong updraft in the center. However, it hasn't fully eyed out yet. There is no visible eye just yet. And that is because it is pretty weak. Because we don't have an eye just yet, this is still pretty weak. However, this is forecasted to at least develop some sort of eye and become a hurricane later on. So this will likely spin out and form an eye. However, as of right now, it just doesn't really look too strong and not that concerning as of right now. However, again, when it strengthens later on, then it will definitely look more concerning. But this is encountering some issues, especially with the overall intensity of it, and the lack of its eye is the good indicator of it struggling a little bit here. However, again, that shouldn't really take away from the fact that this is expected to strengthen into a hurricane, at least category 1, before impacting the Texas coastline. Next, we're going to take a look at a couple of tropical models, specifically the HWRF and the HMON, to see what they are forecasting as far as Hurricane Beryl in the future. So as of right now, you can see with our precipitation, at least, that there is a little bit of an eye. You can see that rotation in the precipitation. However, as it begins to get closer to the coast of Texas, you can see it really tighten up there and organize really quick before impacting just a little bit to the south of where it is forecasted to actually impact. So again, there's your cone of uncertainty, that there is a little bit of uncertainty as far as where it's going to impact. However, the most likely area that it's going to impact is likely going to be a little bit to the north of what this model run is currently indicating. But you can see that intensification pretty clearly before it impacts the Texas coast. And as far as wind speeds go, as of right now, they're probably a little bit weaker because it's not really that organized, but it is expected to intensify quite rapidly before impacting Texas here, with winds that are expected to reach upwards of 90 miles per hour in a couple select areas, but more widespread 80, 70 miles per hour. So that's around a category 1 hurricane. So definitely not rapid intensification and strong intensification to like something major like a category 3 or category 4. It is definitely forecasted to remain more weak around a category 1 to potentially category 2, forecasted by just this model run at least. We can also go back one to our 06Z run for this model to see its intensification. Not as great, but it still intensifies pretty quickly and actually doesn't even get up to a hurricane, just 2 mile per hour below a hurricane. And oh, never mind, there it is, or 83 mile per hour on the next frame. So it does get up to at least a category 1 on this frame, or on this model run. And again, intensifies to that category 1. So we're already seeing that trend there. our HWRF is noticeably more southward compared to where the cone of uncertainty is actually forecasting it to go. And we can also look at the wind speeds again for our 00Z run for HWRF to see how fast those winds are and how rapid that intensification is. So it gets upwards of 80 miles per hour to potentially even 90 miles per hour there. So that is category 1 again. So every single model run that we just looked at, these three here on our HWRF, is forecasting at least category 1 intensity for Hurricane Beryl by the time it does impact the Texas coastline. Then we could also look at HMON for Beryl. We're going to stick with the wind speeds again just to see what the wind speeds are expected to be like by the time it does impact the Texas coastline. So this does forecast upwards of 75 miles per hour at the surface, potentially even 80 miles per hour. So that is at least category 1 again. And then we can go back to our 06Z to see what it says. And that intensifies to wind speeds upwards of 96 miles per hour to even 99 miles per hour, getting close to 100 there. So that is category 1 at least. And then 00Z. I hope you're seeing the pattern already in what models are trending towards. I hope you can see that pattern there. And then the 00Z run says upwards of 68, which isn't quite a hurricane, but it is still tropical storm and can still lead to those hazardous and potentially even deadly impacts. So I hope you saw that trend there. I hope you saw that pattern of every single model run so far, except for one, indicating at least category 1 intensity for Beryl by the time it does impact the Texas coastline. So again, rapid intensification is expected as it moves through the Gulf for the next 2 days, and it is expected to impact the Texas coastline as at least a category 1 hurricane, bringing with it the various impacts that we talked about earlier. Moving on to the severe weather that is currently ongoing, I'm going to try and keep it brief. I'm not really going to go into too much in-depth information on this, but I will at least a little bit. So taking a look at what the SPC currently has issued for severe thunderstorms for today, we currently have a slight risk for the Central Plains for Nebraska, Kansas, as well as the Oklahoma Panhandle and eastern Colorado there. Risks for today do include a 2% tornado risk for southern Nebraska and northern Kansas, a 15% damaging wind risk for the slight risk region, as well as a 15% hail risk, including the possibility for hail that could reach more than 2 inches in diameter in that hatched area. We also do have a marginal risk for the New England corridor for Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts there. And the only risks for today for that marginal risk, which we will not be covering in today's forecast, is a 5% damaging wind risk, where we could see the potential for some isolated damaging wind gusts. For tomorrow, we do have a slight risk for Oklahoma in northern Texas, as well as a slight risk for the Texas coastline there. Risks for tomorrow do include a 5% tornado risk for the slight risk region. This is going to be associated with Hurricane Beryl because we do see a lot of strong lower level winds and a lot of curvature in the low levels of hodograph and a lot of directional shear, not speed shear. Speed shear is horrible for hurricane development, but we will see a lot of directional shear because it is a rotating, strong, and tight surface flow, basically. And that will supply this area with a lot, and I mean a lot of directional shear, and that will be able to support the potential for multiple tornadoes across the Texas coastline tomorrow, which is going to be another big risk that will be brought with Hurricane Beryl. We also do have a 2% tornado risk further to the north for western into central Oklahoma and portions of the Texas Panhandle in the extreme eastern half of the Texas Panhandle. We also do have a 15% damaging wind risk for the slight risk region in the north there, as well as a 5% damaging wind risk for the slight risk in the south. And then we also have a 15% hail risk for the slight risk region in the north, but we won't see a hail risk for the slight risk region in the south associated with Hurricane Beryl because, again, speed shear is absolutely awful for hurricanes, and again, speed shear is obviously what's needed for hail development, so we won't have a hail risk for Hurricane Beryl for tomorrow. We also have a slight risk for our day 3 outlook on the 8th for southeastern Texas and southwestern Louisiana, with a probabilistic 5%. Should be a probabilistic 15%. I guess I was caught in the middle of an SBC update, but there should be a 15% there for that slight risk region. But we could see the potential for some scattered severe thunderstorms on our day 3 outlook on the 8th. As far as our day 4, day 8 outlook goes, we don't really have anything issued for our day 4, day 8 outlook. Taking a look at the WPC outlook, starting off with the excessive rainfall forecast. For today, we do have a slight risk for Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and southern Virginia there, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding. For our day 2 outlook, we do have a slight risk for the Texas coastline ahead of Hurricane Beryl before the day it does impact, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding, as well as a slight risk further to the north for the Central Plains, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding. For day 3 outlook, again, we do have that moderate risk that I was talking about earlier, where we could see the potential for some widespread flash flooding and the possibility for some significant accumulation in some low-lying areas. Taking a look at our surface analysis and our weather models and how those are going to work in conjunction for our risk for severe thunderstorms. Starting off with our surface analysis, we do have a surface low that is along the Kansas Nebraska border there, with a cold front that is beginning to develop further off to the west in northwestern Kansas and central and northern Colorado there. We also have a warm front that is draped across southern Nebraska into northern Kansas there. And the combination of both these will trigger some severe thunderstorms. Some may develop along this cold front that's developing here, and some may also develop along the warm front. And storms are already currently ongoing across this region. And some could even just form out of the fact that there's lower pressure in this region as well, off of just the heat that's standing in this region. So the warm front and the cold front will definitely be the main triggers for our risks for severe thunderstorms for today. But as far as our upper air pattern goes, we do have a trough that is currently moving into this region, so it isn't just a surface low. We don't really have the best 500 millibar flow. We don't really have the best upper level flow. We do have a pretty prominent short wave here that you can pretty clearly see, and that is moving into the region with some weak but decent flow that will at least be sufficient in fueling or supporting the risk for severe thunderstorms, with 500 millibar flow reaching upwards of 40 to 45 knots across this region. It is definitely going to be significantly more on the weaker side of things, but still sufficient in supporting the potential for at least a couple severe thunderstorms across this region. Even if we don't really have that much lift or that much support from it, because our fronts are also a little bit more on the weaker side. We do have a very small warm front attached to that surface low, and a cold front that is developing because it was like in a dotted line kind of. When you look back at our surface analysis, it was broken up. That is a development, cold front development, cold front genesis. So cold fronts aren't really the best, or our fronts right now aren't really the best, so not really too much of initiating boundaries, but still definitely sufficient. We also have weaker 500 millibar flow with that short wave that will kickstart our severe thunderstorms with some extra support from that short wave. But overall, things are definitely going to be on the more mid side of things, but still definitely sufficient in fueling and supporting that risk for severe thunderstorms for today. Taking a look at our low-level jet and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see a pretty weak low-level jet, but it is definitely going to be sufficient in supporting the risk for tornadoes. Right around that 2% tornado risk, which I can actually toggle here so you guys can actually see it. Right around that 2% tornado risk, it does look like we are expected to see at least a weak low-level jet that's going to develop across that region as a mass response from our shortwave and our surface low developing across this region, with 700 millibar flow that looks like it's going to get upwards of 30 to I think 33.5 knots across this region, potentially even 35 knots. It is definitely going to be significantly weaker, but it definitely has a significant difference in direction compared to the flow at our 500 millibars. So we definitely have a low level jet that will definitely be sufficient in fueling the potential for 1 or 2 brief tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how this is going to affect our risk for hail and our risk for severe thunderstorms overall, we are going to see some pretty decent 200 millibar flow across this region because we don't really have that much of a pronounced trough outside of our little shortwave that's rotating through this region. We will have some weaker 200 millibar flow as a result. 200 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of 50 knots to 60 knots further down in the south, but mainly around 50 knots across this region to 55 knots. That will support at least some decent bulk shear across this region. We definitely will not see a whole lot of speed shear, and as a result, not a whole lot of a hail risk, but hail is definitely certainly still possible across this region as a result. And we can look at our soundings here. If we just take a random sounding, we definitely have a little bit of curvature in the low levels of photograph, some nice veering of the winds with height. So we definitely have that directional shear, even if our low-level jet is going to be more so on the weaker side of things. But our photograph is definitely pretty elongated, especially in the mid-levels and sort of in the upper levels. Not as much in the upper levels, but it is definitely supporting the risk for hail just based off the look of that photograph. And you can see here that we definitely have some decent shear, some decent speed shear there. With height. So we will definitely see at least some sort of potential for hail across this region, including the possibility of maybe some large hailstones. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative velocity, or our directional shear, and how that's going to support our risk for tornadoes across this region. With our pretty decently strong low-level jet, we are going to see some pretty decently strong storm relative velocity values across this region, with storm relative velocity values that are going to be reaching at least 100 meters squared a second squared of storm relative velocity, potentially 200 meters squared a second squared of storm relative velocity further off to the north there. So we will definitely see quite a lot of decent storm relative velocity values that will definitely be more than sufficient in supporting the risk for tornadoes across this region. If we turn on our surface cape really quickly, it does look like we are expected to see some decent surface cape as well, with surface cape values reaching at least 1,000 joules per kilogram, but it's definitely not too widespread across this region. We will look at our cape later, but just looking at it now, it doesn't really look like we'll see that really strong amount of surface-based cape, and it won't really be across that widespread of a region, so that could be limiting our tornado risk a little bit more. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that's going to affect our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of bulk shear even when our storms are currently ongoing. However, we are expected to see our bulk shear continue to increase over the next couple of hours into the midnight hours as storms move into more of southeastern Nebraska and into Kansas is more of a linear fashion after storms actually do mainly die down for the night. However, when storms are still ongoing as of right now, we are expected to see quite a lot of bulk shear, with bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of 60 to 50 to 40 knots across this region, 60 knots ahead of our storms, and potentially increasing to upwards of 70 knots to potentially even approaching 80 knots, backing our linear storms as they move through central Kansas. However, we probably won't see as much instability as storms move through central Kansas, so that will likely balance out the hail risk, but we definitely have quite a lot of bulk shear as storms are currently ongoing, and they are able to use the bulk shear or the instability that's currently provided to them, and definitely could see the potential for quite a lot of hail, maybe even some large hail as well, getting upwards of 2 inches or greater. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity and what our various models are saying as far as what storms are going to look like for today. As of right now, storms are currently turning into more of a linear mode, but are probably even at a linear stage as I am currently recording this, so I will stick with this radar frame. For our HRRR, you can see that decent linear mode with storms being significantly more robust in southern Nebraska there. That goes with HRW and SSL, but storms are developing, organizing much faster further down in the south across Kansas than our HRRR, but still hanging on to that linear mode. Same with our HRW AWR, HRW FE3, NAM Nest. Our HRRR 6-hour, not really sure what's going on here. It looks like storms organize much later on our HRRR 6-hour and are significantly more messy and don't really develop further down to the south into the rest of the slight risk, down to the south in southern Kansas or into the Oklahoma panhandle like most models do. As far as our HRW NSSL 12-hour goes, still leading to more of that linear mode. HRW ARW 12-hour, same linear mode there. HRW FE3 and NAM Nest still indicating that linear mode. So if you can see the pattern there, it does look like storms are probably going to be taking on a linear system, more of a linear fashion as storms move through the center of the slight risk, and then as storms exit the slight risk into more of the marginal risk where they won't have as much instability available to them. They'll still remain in that linear mode, but will likely be dying down. But that means that once you are impacted by this line of storms, it's just going to be a one and done thing, and you'll be done for the rest of the night after storms do impact. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that's going to affect our instability, we are expected to see some pretty hot temperatures across this region, with temperatures that are expected to reach upwards of the 80s to even the 90s across this region. So that will definitely lead to quite a lot of instability as storms are progressing through the slight risk region. Taking a look at our dew points and how that's going to affect our instability, we are expected to see not a whole lot of moisture across this region, but we should see some pretty decent dew point values regardless. That are definitely going to be significantly more on the limited side of things, but still definitely sufficient for at least some decent instability. Dew point values in the Nebraska region that are going to be reaching upwards of the low 60s, and further down to the south reaching 50 at minimum, and probably not going to be breaking 60. It may be possible that dew points that could break 60, especially further down to the south there. And our high-resolution ensemble forecast models are significantly more conservative than our standalone like HRRR or NAM 3 kilometer. So we could see some higher dew point values, but this is probably like what is going to most likely happen, where we're going to see some pretty more mid dew point values, but still definitely sufficient for at least a little bit of instability. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms and our instability, it does look like the majority of the risk area is going to be mostly clear. We could see a little bit thicker mid-level cloud cover and potentially some low-level cloud cover, more so into the northern end of that slight risk region. So that's definitely something to watch out for, because it could lead to weaker storms further off to the north, as that will limit our surface instability and our surface heating, leading to weaker storms overall and weaker updrafts further to the north in that slight risk region, to the north of that slight risk region, more so into central and northern Nebraska. However, further down to the south in southern Nebraska and the rest of the slight risk region, it does look like it is going to be basically completely clear. Doesn't really look like we'll see much cloud cover, if any, across Kansas or southern Nebraska, which will allow for total surface heating. And because we don't really see a cumulus field, and I don't know how well these models handle cumulus fields with the low-level cloud cover, so there may be a cumulus field as far as instability goes. However, the lack of a cumulus field being picked up by models may indicate more convective inhibition in place, which could lead to more explosive storms by the time the cap does break, but could also suppress the potential for storms across this region, but we'll look at that later. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that's going to affect our instability and our risk for severe thunderstorms overall, we are expected to see some pretty decent lapse rate values across the Nebraska and Kansas region. Lapse rate values that are expected to get upwards of 8 to 7 ahead of the line of storms there. So quite a lot of decent lapse rates values will definitely be supportive of quite a lot of instability across this region. Our dew point values are definitely something to watch out for, because they may lead to less instability than what we may be thinking currently. So by the time we do look at our most most unstable cape values that will definitely answer a couple of questions. But quite a lot of lapse rate values, definitely going to lead to more organized storms and more stronger storms, because we will have some greater instability values as a result. But this will also allow for the potential for some pretty massive hailstones across this region, again greater than 2 inches, with some pretty decent bulk shear values, as the lapse rates will lower the layer for hail development, making it closer down to the ground, and making it easier for hail to develop in a strong updraft, and allowing for bigger hail sizes as well. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that's going to fuel our severe thunderstorms for today. As I was previously mentioning, we probably weren't going to have a whole lot of instability across this region as a result. Our lapse rates and our temperatures are definitely doing a lot of the work in supporting these most unstable cape values. Of course, our dew points are also helping a little bit, but honestly, because they're not really much, our dew point values are kind of limiting our cape quite significantly, actually, with dew point or most unstable cape values that are expected to get upwards of 2,000 in that very small pocket there. Just where our warm front and our cold front kind of meet together, right before feeding into the surface low, just a little bit to the east of that surface low there. So we will have at least some decent and sufficient most unstable cape values that will support that risk for 1 or 2 brief tornadoes, the potential for some massive hailstones greater than 2 inches, as well as the potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts. However, because cape values are a little bit weaker as a result of dew points being weaker, we will definitely see these most unstable cape values being a little bit more limiting, even though they are definitely more than sufficient in supporting that risk for severe thunderstorms. If we had greater most unstable cape values, more instability, then we could potentially see a larger risk for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our surface-based cape as well as our convective inhibition, how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms. We did have a really strong cap in the morning hours into what seems to be noon across this region. But again, storms are currently ongoing, and it's I'm pretty sure it's around 6 p.m. as of right now. So it is definitely later on. We do have a little bit of convective inhibition in place, but honestly, it's not much, and storms are definitely going to be significantly less limited than if it did have a little bit of convective inhibition. So the cap is fully eroded. Storms are free to fire whenever along that cold front. However, they are more likely going to fire closer to that surface low, where there's going to be more forcing along that cold front. So that convective inhibition in the morning hours before storms actually did fire will likely lead to more explosive storms. However, it does look like the majority of our most unstable cape is expected to translate down to our surface as well, allowing for surface-based storms without a doubt, and allowing for the potential of tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that may aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. We may have a small pocket of 0 to 3 kilometer instability right there, but honestly, it's not really going to be too much. I don't really notice much 0 to 3 kilometer instability. So we will be lacking that aid at the surface, but even when it's not there, storms are still going to be more than free to support the potential for tornadoes, especially with our decent surface-based cape. It's more so if we have 0 to 3 kilometer instability, then it's something to watch, because that will aid in fueling our risk for severe thunderstorms and fueling those updrafts. However, if we don't really have it, it's not that big of a deal. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to indicate our potential for tornadoes for today, we are expected to see some pretty decent energy helicity index values that are going to be honestly more in line with a 5% tornado risk than really a 2% tornado risk. And we can pull a sounding here just to see what's going on in the environment. We'll give it a second to load, but this is honestly quite decent in supporting the risk for severe thunderstorms. We have more than sufficient instability and some pretty fat cape, especially above the surface as well, but that also extends down to the surface. Very large inflow layer, and basically no cap whatsoever, and quite a lot of decent shear as well. Very decently sheared environment will support the potential for hail, and lots of curvature in the low levels of this photograph, nicely sheared in the mid levels and upper levels. So honestly, this does look pretty good. This is definitely a tornado producing sounding here, as indicated by our probable hazard type. And again, tornadoes are definitely more than possible across this region, especially with just the look of the sounding. Again, tornadoes are definitely on the table for today, more than reinforced by looking at this sounding. Taking a look at our meso-analysis here, it does look like I may be a little bit late in making this forecast, because storms are looking like they're already becoming more outflow dominant and progressing through the majority of the slight risk already. But if we look at our decape here and how that's going to indicate the potential for damaging wind gusts, we have quite a lot of decape across this region, with decape values that look like they're going to be reaching upwards of 1,300 joules per kilogram to even 1,500 joules per kilogram around the Kansas region, and further up to the north, reaching at least 1,000 joules per kilogram, 1,100 joules per kilogram, even 800 and 900, which is going to be more readily available to storms moving through southern Nebraska there, northern Kansas. So we do have a lot of decape, and that will definitely lead to some pretty strong downdrafts, and again, definitely the potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts. Taking a look at our large hail parameter and how this is going to indicate the potential for hail across this region, we do have upwards of 12 and 8 for both locations, where we could see the potential for some large hail. For significant hail parameter, we do have a 2 further off to the north, but that won't really be readily available to storms, but we do have a 1 for both locations, indicating the potential for some significant hail. SARS hail size 2 or 1.75 inches in red there. Honestly, I feel kind of stupid for missing this, because I just waited too long to make this forecast, and I'm sorry about that. Our significant hail percentage, again, it's not even available to storms at this time. So yeah, it is indicating that we do have an overlap of ingredients for hail. But it's just not going to be readily available for storms right now. Again, I'm sorry for waiting so long to make this forecast. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials of Project Gladiator, and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast, or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow in another forecast.